My name is Mary Evans, and I am married to John Evans. We are an ordinary family. Before John and I met, I used to hear men whistling all the time. It's considered sexist these days, but I loved it both before and after I got married. It told me that I could still get men's attention. When I was in my early 20s, we met John and started dating. I fell in love with him the first day we met. The same thing happened with John. After a year of dating, we had a dinner date, and that night was the last time I was alone. John did things the old-fashioned way and asked me to marry him. Before he was done, I said yes. Before we got married, we had a long conversation. He grew up in a small family, and I grew up in a large family. We talked about our careers and, of course, kids. During that long conversation, I told John that I didn't want to have children. He told me he would like to have one or two, but because he loved me so much, he agreed not to have children. It was my body, and he respected me for being so honest with him. When I told him I didn't want to have kids, we had to break up so he could have kids with another woman. He thought about it and told me, "If that's what you want, then that's what he wants too." That said, he was head over heels in love with me. So, we got married, and life has been wonderful. We have been married for over 10 years now, and we still love each other. Whenever we were out and about, I would see John looking at and smiling at little kids. Every time I saw John with that smile, I knew what he was thinking. He wanted children. He knew the reason. I didn't want to have children. It was because of my family. Adults fighting for life and children holding them back, and that wasn't for me. I wanted a career and a loving husband. It was my decision when we started talking about children, and John agreed with it, but never explained to me why. I was on birth control pills before we were married, and throughout our marriage. It was a daily routine to take the damn pill. It was like a rule to follow. You have to take them. If you don't, you're going to have kids. 3 things happened. The first and second happened because of me. The third went to John. Or was it the other way around? Either way, it doesn't matter now. Let's be clear. It was about 2 months ago. Give or take a day or two. These days, you can order a prescription online and wait for your doctor to approve it. Or take the old-fashioned way and drop off the request to your doctor-pharmacist. Wait a couple days and pick it up. Well, anyway, I forgot to renew my prescription. That was my first stupidity. Then I remembered. I'll have to wait until I get my period before it works again. Even though I forgot, it didn't stop John and I from making tender love. But when I had my period to conceive, I was careful. We were always careful in those times. Even though I was on birth control, accidents could happen or the pill might not protect me. A few weeks before the accident, John felt sick and went to the doctor. The doctor sent him for a checkup for 2 days, and we had to wait for the results. John got a call from the doctors asking him to come in. When John returned, he headed to the drink bar and poured 2 large glasses. He held one out to me. "Mary, please have a seat. I have something to tell you." John was clearly agitated. We sat down. "Mary, what I'm about to tell you may not be so bad. I've just been to the doctor. I have the test results." I sipped my drink, waiting for John to continue. "Mary, I don't know the medical term for what I have. My head is a foggy mess right now, but I have a tumor in my brain. The doctor called it some kind of brain tumor. I need surgery to remove it. I should warn you that things could go the other way." "John, what do you mean it could go the other way?" "Well, Mary, I could leave it, and tomorrow I could drop dead from it. But they have experience with this kind of operation. They've had great success. So, I told him I'd do the operation. I was terrified of what my loving husband had told me. My hands were shaking with terror. I took my glass, drained it, and poured a second one. John stared into space, trying to figure out what was wrong with him. I put my arm around him and kissed his forehead. "John, don't worry. People can do miracles these days. Let's make plans for the future." We sat on the couch and talked. We made plans of where we would like to go and see some more places. I didn't take his problem lightly. In fact, I was worried to death, but I wasn't going to show it. I wanted to distract him. We had a little fun on the couch. His thoughts changed. I made him think about making sweet love because I wanted him to take his mind off his problems. I stood up and held my arms out to him, heading for our bedroom. I undressed him, and he undressed me. Like all the nights before, we made love. Our passionate lovemaking was endless. John was as sensitive as ever. I wanted more so he could forget his problem. John could do this for hours and drive me to exhaustion. I wanted it to go on all night long. Well, our lovemaking was fantastic. He was as loving and passionate as ever. We saw daylight coming through the blinds. I helped John forget his problems for a while. I had my own problem, too. I was dating a friend of ours who lived around the corner from both of us. What I mean by dating our friend, I was having an affair. His name was George. It only lasted 3 months. George thought he was God's gift to women, but he wasn't. He only had girlfriends for a few weeks. The reason was that he was useless in bed, but he thought otherwise. When I thought of George as a romantic lover, I laughed to myself. Thank God it didn't last long. The worst part was that it made me sick to think about it and what I had done. I had cheated on the man I loved, John. As for John, he was an amazing lover. As for George, I can't even remember how it started and why I let it go on for so long. I must have lost my mind. Even today, I'm trying to figure out why. John got sick at work and ended up in the hospital. He wasn't allowed visitors for 2 days while they ran tests, including me. Then I remembered what happened the next day. I'd arranged to meet George at the Blue Bay Hotel in the afternoon. This was to be the last time, and I was going to tell him it was over. I arrived at the Blue Bay Hotel at the agreed time to meet George. I started to tell George that it was over. George didn't take too kindly to my ending our relationship. He grabbed me by the shoulders and started hitting on me. He wanted sex, and he was going to get it one way or another. I told him to stop or I would scream. After saying that, he instantly changed. He then told me that if I didn't have sex with him, he was going to tell John. He was going to blackmail me into continuing to have sex with him. I had to agree just so he wouldn't tell John. I would pay him back later. I thought about it. I just lay there and let him continue as he was. I vowed that I would not jeopardize my marriage. Ever again. That was what was important to me and my life. And who I loved was John. What I was doing was cheating on my husband. I felt guilty and dirty. And for what? Some lousy sex with George? I thought, what am I doing here? I should be with John. Get the hell out of here and go to the hospital with the man I love. Which I did. At home, I had to wash off George's scent. I felt dirty. After taking a shower, I went to the hospital. The doctors let me in when they finished doing tests on John. While I was there, I felt more guilty than I ever had before. But John needed to be looked after. The doctors told me that John could go home tomorrow. He has to take sick leave from work until they get all the test results back. If he feels unwell, he must come back immediately. The next day, we went home with a list of what we could and couldn't do. Strict diet, a list of vitamins to take, papers telling him what exercises to do. Why does he have to exercise? Because of the brain tumor. It's in his head. The most important thing was John. And we were going to talk about what we were going to do after the surgery. But we didn't know when that would happen. We had to wait for the results and for the specialists. We were even stronger than before. We laughed and joked all the time when we were together. But in the back of my mind, I thought about George. I wanted him to go away. A month later, the specialists met and set a date for the surgery. We had a meeting with the specialists. They discussed every little detail. What John needed to know about the surgery. He had to understand what he was going to go through. He had to understand everything before he signed the consent for the surgery. John went in for preoperative preparation. 2 days later, the surgery was scheduled for the next day. I feared death. The specialist doctor's name was Snowden. Dr. Snowden wanted to speak to me privately. It was regarding John's medical condition. He informed John in private before he spoke to me. Dr. Snowden told me that John's brain tumor was a borderline case. I asked him what that meant. It all depended on the tumor not spreading. He was hoping to remove the entire tumor without a trace. If it did, John had a very good chance of a full recovery. But if the whole thing wasn't removed, it would affect John's behavior. Things like depression and deep sadness are possible. John will become a different person. He may even want to take his own life. "Mrs. Evans, I want to ask you a very personal question," Dr. Snowden said. "Yes, doctor, I'm listening." "Mrs. Evans, it's about your relationship with Mr. Evans. Please tell me if your marriage is strong," Dr. Snowden said, looking at me. "Doctor, I love my husband and we have planned what we will do when he is fully recovered. I promise you I won't give him any reason to worry," I said with irony in my voice. At that very moment, two thoughts flashed through my mind. God, I didn't take my pills. Jesus Christ, I was cheating on John. How can I tell the doctor I didn't take the damn birth control pills? And worst of all, my affair with George. I had to lie, but it was for John's sake, not mine. The day before the surgery, John came out of the bathroom. He'd shaved off all his hair. He was bald as a badger. I laughed when I saw his bald head. "Mary, I did it so the hair would hide the scar when it grows back," John told me. Common sense told me he was right. John was on the operating table for 6 hours. I was on pins and needles. My mind was racing back and forth. George kept coming back to me. Why the hell did I cheat on John? Why the hell did I cheat on my loving husband? And for God's sake, why? John was discharged from surgery and was moved to the ICU. He was on drugs and had to be unconscious for at least 24 to 36 hours. 24 hours later, John opened his eyes. He kept blinking to see where he was, and to make sure he was still in the world. As soon as John opened his eyes, the nurse called the doctor on duty. It was Dr. Snowden. I was in the waiting room and was told that John was awake. I burst into tears of joy. Dr. Snowden was examining John when I entered the room. "Mrs. Evans, please sit down. I need to examine your husband, you may observe, but don't ask any questions yet." The doctor stayed with John for about 10 minutes. John answered all his questions and followed all his instructions. All I could think about was that my husband was back. John looked strange with a bandage on his head. "Nurse, please give Mr. Evans a sleeping pill when Mrs. Evans leaves. He needs to rest. I'll see you in the morning, now rest," the doctor told me. We tried to talk, but John was tired. His eyes were rolling and he needed sleep. So I told the nurse I was going home and would be back early tomorrow morning. I went home satisfied that one of my problems was behind me. Over the next few days, John looked like he was getting better. One day he was on his feet, and the next day he was depressed. The doctors warned me about this. It was quite normal, and he would change with time. At least John was talking to me. On good days, we joked about his new headgear, and we reminisced about how we met, and so on. John's progress now depended solely on himself. All I could do was help him as best I could. A week after the surgery, everything was ready. Dr. Snowden and his team of specialists informed us both that the surgery had been a complete medical success. My fears were dispelled. John was still drugged and on medication. He still had headaches and it was depressing him. It was not uncommon for him to become irritable and respond with snarky remarks. I could put up with it because other days he was as happy as he had ever been. Time is a great healer. We went back to reminiscing about people we'd met, and about funny things that happened to other people we met. It made him laugh. I added a little more. I needed to keep him happy. As we talked, John started to get better. Although it was so slow, he was trying his best, he told me. But men don't tell you everything, as you know very well. They keep secrets to themselves. Every time I was with John, I hoped he was having a good day. But there were good days and bad days. This time I visited John and he was feeling fine. But he wanted to talk. Mary, while I was lying here, I was thinking a lot. About the last 6 months or so, John told me with a strange expression on his face. I wondered what he was going to say. Mary, you know when we used to go to these house parties with our friends? Yeah, house parties? They're our friends, that's all. No, Mary, there's something I've got to tell you that you'll understand. Mary, think of Jenny, your best friend when she and Fred suddenly disappeared, and you haven't heard from her since. Yes, John. I think they're in some kind of trouble, but why? I hope she'll talk to me when they've settled things between them. No, Mary, it's what happened at the party. Jenny asked me to meet her at the King's Hotel this afternoon for 3 or 4 hours. John told me with his head down. John, are you saying you cheated on me with my friend? No, Mary. I told her I loved you and only you. I was never going to do anything like that behind your back, he told his loving wife. So that's why Jenny dragged Fred away from the party. She wanted you to cheat on me. And now I understand why she won't talk to me or see me, bitch. Then my thoughts turned back to George. God's gift to women. Why did John bring up Jenny? Or did John find out about me and George? No, that's impossible. John hasn't been home in a few days. God, what would I do if he found out about me and George? Mary, I remember you and one of our neighbors used to hang out a lot. And I thought you had your eye on him, John said, looking right at me. John, who are you talking about? You always know I talk to all of our friends when we're at a party, I said, lying through my teeth. Mary, you know who I'm talking about. He had his arm around your waist. You were looking into his eyes. I know that look. John, who are you talking about? I can't remember who it could be, I said, excusing myself. Mary, the one you always say is God's gift to women. John, how could you think that of me? I love you, and you will stop this nonsense right now, and just get well. The doctor came as soon as I finished talking to John. Thank goodness it at least interrupted John's train of thought. I got up to leave. The doctor told me to stay put. The doctor ran all the same tests I had seen before. Are you in pain? If yes, tell me the level of pain, a number between 1 and 10. The doctor addressed John. John replied that he had a score of 8. The doctor told the nurse to give John an injection of something. I can't even pronounce the word, let alone spell it. As soon as the nurse injected John with the medicine, John started to fall asleep, so I went home, with my newfound problems. When I left the hospital, I had a strange feeling, so I stopped by the pharmacy. I bought a pregnancy test. A woman's intuition told me I was pregnant. Once I was home, I read the instructions and headed to the bathroom. I took the test twice. Well, I was pregnant, but I was sure it was John. Even so, there were doubts that it could be George. That was the end of it all. No way. It had to be John. He'd be the father. That's what he wanted. So be it. I prayed it wouldn't be George. All because I forgot to take my birth control pills when I had sex with George. Well, it was condom sex. It wasn't love sex. It was a fling, nothing more. But we went out a lot of times. I wish I could turn back time. Come on, girl. The baby says it'll make John happy tomorrow and he'll get better a lot faster. I went back to the hospital to visit him on my lunch break. I was going to spend the whole day at John's bedside. I was waiting for the right moment to tell him that he was going to be a father. The drugs he was on made him happy, and he was sitting up in bed. I was feeling comfortable. It was time to tell him he was going to be a father. That's what he wanted to be. I sat down on the bed. I held John's right hand and looked into his eyes with a smile. He smiled back, and we kissed quickly and sweetly. I ran my hand over the scar on his head, knowing that it would eventually be hidden by his hair. John, I have something to tell you, and you're going to love it. As for me, I'm madly in love with you, and I love what I'm about to tell you, I said, smiling from ear to ear. I looked over at John. I wanted to make sure he looked happy. I have to say this. John, you're going to be a daddy. I hope it will be a boy. Even if it's a girl, whatever it is, she needs a father. So get well soon, and let us both go home and make new plans. I waited for John to give me a hug and a kiss, receiving the most pleasant news a father-to-be could receive. But John did nothing. He looked at me without any expression on his face. Then his face changed a little. I saw tears appear in his eyes. I thought to myself that he was beyond excited about the good news and didn't know what to say. I squeezed his right hand, hoping he would do the same for me. We sat there looking at each other. I wanted John to say something. I was just about to speak when he spoke to me. "Mary, tonight when you come back to visit me, please do something," John asked, wiping his crying eyes. "Yes, John. I'll do anything for you." "What is it, my love?" "Mary, there's an envelope with my name on it in the bottom right-hand drawer of the desk. Will you bring it with you when you come to my house tonight?" John, I was going to spend the whole day talking about the baby we're going to have. You won't believe this, but I'm so happy for both of us. I thought you'd be thrilled with the good news. "Mary, please do as I told you. Bring the envelope with you tonight. Then we'll talk." He pressed the call button by the bedside and a nurse entered the room. "Nurse, I need something. My pain is back," John said to the nurse. I didn't think he was in pain. He was hiding it from me when the nurse gave him something from the list of medicines. After that, he calmed down. So, I left the hospital. On the way home, I was concerned about how John reacted to the news of our baby. Could he have thought he wouldn't recover? Could he not take care of me and our baby? Could he not be a father? I've seen the way he looks at boys and girls. Why doesn't he read bedtime stories? Or teach our child to ride a bike, play soccer, go fishing, and teach him how to swim? I could go on forever, but I'm going to have to stop thinking like that. Whatever it is, I'll try to find out tonight. Where is the damn envelope? What happened that I have to take it? On the way back to the hospital, I reflected on the fact that John should be fine, and he's going to be a great father. When I entered his room, he was already sitting up. The envelope was in my purse. I was about to sit down, but John looked at me. I wasn't sure what that look meant. "Mary, did you bring the envelope with you?" John asked before I could sit down. I opened my bag and pulled out the envelope. I held it out to him. What was so important in that envelope, I wondered? I should have read it at home, I thought. John took the envelope from me. "Mary, have you read this?" John asked. "No, it's addressed to you, not me." John opened the envelope and took out a piece of paper. It looked like some kind of official document. He read what was written on the paper to make sure of what it said. When he finished reading this piece of paper, he threw his head back and closed his eyes for a second or two. Then he held it out to me. "Mary, this was supposed to be my present to you on the anniversary of our acquaintance. Remember, 6 months ago I had to go away for 2 weeks for work," John said. "Yes. So what does the letter you're holding say?" "Mary, yes. I did go away for work, but I was also in the hospital. Do you want to read this, or do you want me to tell you what it says?" I grabbed the piece of paper. I wanted to read it myself. It was a letter from the hospital, and it said the following: "Patient John Evans," followed by his date of birth, then our home address and phone number. I saw the name of the surgeon followed by the name of the urology department. I read what was written and looked at all the meaningless numbers. The surgery was successful. Sperm motility is 0. There are no living spermatozoa, signed and dated by the doctor. "Mary, what you just read, I had a vasectomy. It was my gift to you, so you could stop taking birth control pills every day. I did it for you, because you were constantly checking and rechecking to see if you had a baby. Repeatedly, because you didn't want to have kids. And I accepted that and was willing to live with it until one day I died. I did it because I loved you so much. You see, Mary, I can't be the father of the child you're carrying." I dropped the letter and wrapped my arms around my head, tears welling up. I begged him to listen to me, but he turned away from me, staring out the window. John pressed a button by the bedside. A nurse came in and, seeing me crying, looked at John. Somehow she realized that John wanted me to leave and the nurse told me to leave. I refused to leave and the nurse called security. They took me by the arms and led me out of the room. I screamed for John to answer me, but he never did. Day after day I tried to see John, but he told the hospital staff not to let me in, so I started calling him. I only got through once. As soon as he knew it was me, the phone disconnected. On the 5th day, I decided to go into the doctor's office. His assistant wouldn't let me in. So I walked straight into the office. "Yes, Mrs. Evans, what can I do for you?" "I want to see my husband. I need to explain 1 or 2 things to him and ask his forgiveness. I love him, and you can see that. Please, doctor, can I see him right now?" I said to the doctor. I collapsed into one of the chairs, brimming with tears. You see, I had to see John, to explain myself and beg him to forgive me. I would do anything he wanted me to do. But I had to see him. Dr. Snowden looked at me, shaking his head from side to side. He stood up and walked around his desk, stopping in front of me. I tried to hold back my tears. He put both hands on my shoulders. "Mrs. Evans, I have some bad news for you. Your husband passed away tonight. Someone should have called you and told you. Please accept my condolences for your loss." "Why did he die? Didn't you say he was doing well?" "Unfortunately, 5 days ago, his condition began to deteriorate dramatically. Maybe he wasn't taking all his medication. That's all I can think of," the doctor told me. I walked out of the hospital with a death certificate. I had never before thought about death or what to do with our bodies. Would I order John to be buried or cremated? If I bury him, who would take care of his grave when I was gone? Cremation was the only option. What about the baby I was carrying that wasn't John's? John's funeral was the most important event for me at that moment, so I organized it in less than a week. John was gone. I cremated him, leaving a long note of love in my memory book. So now I had to deal with my infidelity. But how? Should I have killed myself and the baby, give birth to the baby and put it up for adoption, or have the baby and leave it in the church? Have the baby and look after it myself? If I do that, I can't call the baby's middle name Evans. I'd have to use my maiden name or the biological father's. What happens if I fall in love with the baby? What do I do? What should I do? I sat there staring at the wall, thinking I killed my husband when I told him I was pregnant. I remembered how he looked and said nothing. I wanted him to hold me tight and kiss me long and passionately. That never happened. Now I know the reason why. It was because of his vasectomy. He did it for me. His loving wife cheated on him behind his back. How could I forgive myself? I started thinking about George. He thought he was God's gift to women. I think the condom he used one day burst or was defective in some way. As soon as he gets home from work, I'm going to tell George I'm having his baby. I knocked on George's front door, and he invited me in. We sat down across from each other. I bet he expected me to go to the bedroom where he was having serious problems. I told George all about John and that the baby I was carrying was his. I think he expected me to ask him to marry me, but he wasn't the marrying kind. When I told him I was having his baby, for a minute or so he was silent. Then he laughed. "Mary, the baby is your problem, not mine. You knew what you were doing. I have a new woman every night. Why should I marry a whore like you?" he told me. He showed his true colors, so I left his house muttering something to myself. My problem was the baby. I started thinking about the man I truly loved, John. That was the day I told him I was pregnant. That must have been the day I started killing the man I loved. He supported me, he loved me, he trusted me. How did I cheat on him? But George will pay. I found an attractive woman, a diagnosed night butterfly. I paid for her to have sex with George. Within a month, he was spending every other night with her. It cost me a lot of money. I wanted God's gift to women to hook up with something awful since a woman was given that. One day he'd regret it. I had a baby, and I put it up for adoption. I got a job and moved. I'll keep my secret for the rest of my life. The next man I make love to will belong to me completely. I will have children with him. The fact that I am a loving mother will give him confidence and make him a happy man, just like myself. Before you ask, I have found a new man, and I love him. But I think about my first love, John, every day. All I can say is, don't cheat, and especially don't cheat, it's not worth it.